Hello, historians. Today, let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. So this is the first attempt that the recently liberated colonies made at establishing their own government. And so they really had a lot to deal with and a lot of ideas and questions and issues that they needed to grapple with as they were designing this new government. So, Articles of Confederation. Now, these were really only in effect for about 2 years. So, over the course of the next short lecture, we're going to explore kind of why the articles were successful, why they maybe weren't successful, and we will end with kind of a prediction as to what you think will happen next. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Summer Cherland. Now, you may have seen this cartoon or this drawing before. You've probably seen it in yellow or tan. This is an image that gets kind of referenced a lot with revolutionary history, but actually Join or Die, which was a political cartoon published in the 1750s rather, was published in Ben Franklin's newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. And this was kind of an editorial claim that was arguing that if the colonies didn't join in the French and Indian War effort, that they would ultimately kind of disintegrate on their own. So the idea is that this is a divided snake that was divided into 8 different pieces, each representing its own colonial government. And at the time, there was this like popular myth or belief that if a snake was cut in two, that it could sort of come back to life if the pieces were joined before a certain end of time period. So the end of the day or before sunset, for example. So this was really a good, kind of a good reminder for us that the colonies weren't all united from the beginning, that they actually were relatively separate from each other, and that there were some people who really advocated for this separation or this division, but then there were others like Franklin who really believed in the unification power of the colonies. And that comes back, 20 some years later at the end of the American Revolution. Now, this is a video done, it's linked in your reading list, about the American Revolution, and it's kind of a short video reminding us that the American Revolution wasn't exactly this like mythologized, romanticized coming together of all Americans. That in fact, Americans were deeply divided on the future of their colonies and their relationships to the European and English crown. So it's really kind of a great reminder to us that the revolution was not waged on grit and idealism alone, that actually Americans, colonists, were battling with each other on a regular basis. And one of the things you might learn in this short clip is that Americans changed their alliances over the course of the war, sort of depending on who was winning. So unless you were one of like the founding revolutionaries of the time, if you were a George Washington or a James Madison or a Thomas Jefferson, you probably didn't have this like spirited unification against the crown. This really wasn't common among everyday people in the way that we might assume today. So a couple facts about the American Revolution. It ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. The Revolutionary War itself lasted for just over 7 years, and the Americans didn't fight and win it on their own. I think that there's kind of an assumption, right, that like we were this ragtag group of rebels who, just the spirit and the beliefs in freedom and were enough to inspire this misfit band of revolutionaries against the greatest military in history at the time. Really, no, America had a lot of help from France, Spain, and the Netherlands, which all three helped to win the American Revolution. Now, you recognize these names. France, Spain, and the Netherlands have been involved in American history from the beginning of colonial efforts. And these 3 countries were always at war with Great Britain when it came to global dominance. So it really benefited France, Spain, and the Netherlands to watch Great Britain suffer under American independence movements. So it's a massive challenge now, right? America, these 13 kind of disparate colonies, have all won this unexpected war against this humongous empire. So the Second Continental Congress meets to just determine like, well, what next? Like, congratulations, you've won your freedom. What do you do now? And so what they really try to do is form or shape kind of the government or the structure that these newly independent colonies now have. So how are we all gonna just be on our own? Are we gonna join or die? Are we gonna be one united country? Are we gonna be 13 separate countries? Like, what are we? So what happens is each of these 13 colonies gets to elect one representative from each of their colonies to show up at the Second Continental Congress. So there's more than 13 people arrive, but there's 13 voting delegates that are identified. John Dickinson, whose name you may not recognize and you may never see again, he's from Delaware, and he is the principal writer of the Articles of Confederation. And these are the questions that these colonists, former colonists, are asking. They're asking, how should we organize these colonies under one government? How do we actually put these 13 colonies into place? How can we ensure liberty and independence for each colony? And who is allowed to vote? Who is in charge, right? Who gets to vote, lead, and speak on behalf of individual colonies, but on behalf of the 13 colonies united as well? So this is when the Second Continental Congress meets. They actually get together before the war is officially over in 1776. And I just want you to imagine, if you will, it's 1777. You are the chosen delegate of your colony. So you are the one guy, because it was only men at the time, who was invited to attend this convention, that at this convention will create a new system of government that will rule the former 13 colonies. Just know there's no constitution, there's no Bill of Rights, nothing exists. This is just the Declaration of Independence, basically. You, as a delegate, are responsible for writing and proposing one law. You have to write one law or one rule. This law might organize the government, explain the role of each former colony, or empower individuals. I want you to take a moment, pause the recording, and draft your proposed law. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. I just want you to write down, like, if you're one of the chosen delegates, what is a law that you would propose to this brand new government that would organize these 13 former colonies? Go ahead and pause the recording and write your law. All right, what's your law? Did it organize the government, or did it empower individuals? Now, this is really interesting when you start to think about the way we think today in modern society about the role of government and about the role of freedom or legislation. So those of you who wrote a law that organized the government, you are probably in the minority. I have done this assignment or done this activity with students for almost a decade, and almost always our students tend to write things on the other column, the empowering individual side. But there might be a reason for that, right? It's always very easy for us to kind of think about our own rights and liberties. But if you're actually organizing the structure of a government, these are the kinds of things you might have been thinking of if you wrote more on the left column. So for example, did it organize the government? Meaning, did you identify who is in charge? Who's the guy? Who's the leader? Who's the president? Who's the king? Who's the whatever? Who is in charge? How is the government funded? How do we pay the people who are in charge? How do we pay for things that we all need access to, communal resources? How are major decisions made? So do we vote on decisions? Does one guy get to make the final call? How are these official decisions made? Also, how are things enforced? Did you come up with a law and then come up with a way to enforce that law? That's an organizational question. Did you have anything to do with the military, taxes, or legislation, which is writing laws? If you were one of the students who wrote a law that is organizing the government, you are in the minority, but you would have fit in very well with the group writing the Articles of Confederation, and in fact, those writing the Constitution. It actually doesn't come till so much later in American history that this side, the right side, not correct, but the right in terms of orientation, that this starts to really become important to American legislators. Doesn't empower individuals. So if your brand new law has anything to do with the freedom of, right? So maybe you wrote freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of right to bear arms, freedom of assembly, right? Any of those kinds of things that is an individual's freedom, that is a law that wouldn't have been written during the Articles of Confederation days. They weren't really concerned about individuals. They were concerned about the structure of this government. If you identified the rights and responsibilities of individuals or guarantees from the government, a way that individuals could protect themselves from the governing or ruling body, you would not have fit in with the Articles of Confederation writers, but you're in a good majority because most, like 95% of my students tend to write laws that emphasize this column over here. And that's just because of kind of the way Americans function now in the 21st century. So let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. What did they emphasize, and what kind of focus would you have seen if you'd have been at this convention? So the Articles of Confederation was technically the first constitution of the United States. In it, these delegates formed what they called a League of Friendship for the 13 sovereign and independent states. So those former colonies. So, okay, they establish a name, and they establish that those former colonies are states. They actually start calling them states instead of colonies. Instead of countries, right, they start calling them states. They identified that basically, if it's not in the Articles, if it's not listed in the Articles of Confederation, the states get full freedom to exercise whatever they want. So all authority goes to the states unless it's already clarified in the Articles of Confederation. And basically, who is in charge? Like, who's in charge of these 13 states? Well, it is a representative central government. Each state gets one vote. So there's 13 votes. They make a decision as a confederation. From that point forward, majority rules, basically. So there's no judge, there's no lawmaker, there's no Congress, and there's no president. It's just the agreement among these 13 states that they're all just going to be friends. Sounds pretty, pretty promising. Well, there's a couple benefits. We'll explore this in depth a little bit later, but generally speaking, the Articles of Confederation had some benefits and some drawbacks. The first, in terms of benefits, was there was a very weak central government, right? There's no central governing body. These are just 13 voters, basically. This means that all the authority, the majority of the authority, goes to the states. And another benefit was that each state was on the same equal footing as another state. So no state was more powerful than the other based on population or economic wealth. But there were a lot of drawbacks too. I mean, this was a loosely organized plan, and you could see it only lasted for 2 or so years. The first was that this central government, which was really just a voting body, had very insufficient power and authority. They couldn't regulate things like taxes or trade among other countries. There was no standing army. So like if, France attacked Maine, like Maine was basically on their own, like Maine was its own state, its own entity. So Massachusetts could like help Maine if they wanted, but there was no central militia to support or defend all 13 colonies together. No money. There was no way to make money. How does the central government even like get money? There's no taxes. There's no like central bank. Each state has its own bank. There was a lot of high inflation, which we'll discuss later. And there was no authority among these 13 delegates to settle any disputes that occurred among the states. And then finally, there was a lot of controversy over territory, which state had which control, where the boundaries were drawn, and who could trade with whom using what currency. So these are some of the concerns and the benefits of the Articles of Confederation. So let's evaluate. I'm going to have you take a chance and look over either an article or two, but we'll do this together first, and then you'll have some time to work on your own. Let's evaluate. So article number 1 of the Articles of Confederation is the style, which is kind of an old term, meaning like the name or the title. The style of this confederacy shall be, quote, the United States of America. Okay, that's article 1. Done. We got ourselves a law. Did you think of that when I told you to propose a law? Did you think like, well, what should we name our country? It seems so obvious to us, but think about how difficult that might have been for those 13 delegates to come up with an official name for this new country of 13 separate states. Okay, what are the benefits of this? Think about a benefit or two. Maybe the fact that there's a name now. Okay, we got a unifying identity. Excellent. Any drawbacks? Any particular issues that you could possibly see? This will become clear as you go. So now you're going to try. You are going to read one or a couple of the Articles of Confederation, and you're going to answer the following questions. 1, does this article govern individuals, states, or federal power and authority? So is this article focusing on an individual's freedom, a state freedom, or the overarching authority of the federal or central powers. How is this article enforceable? How are you going to enforce this? This is really a question I want you to think about. Like, how could you enforce this particular article? What is one potential? Because it's not going to be identified for you in the articles. It's going to be like something you have to infer on your own. What is one potential good thing about this article and one potential drawback? Now, before you read the articles, I want to give you a warning. The Articles of Confederation were not written for people like you and me to easily understand and interpret. They were truly written to keep people out. They were written for the elite only, highly educated legal minds who could understand some of this language. They were also written in 18th century English. So like, it's totally fine if you're starting to read it and you're like, I do not understand this. It's actually kind of intentional. You weren't really supposed to understand it, but I want you to do your best. So maybe it'll help also if you try to interpret what this article means. Now look down below. I'm going to assign you an article by first name. So access the Articles of Confederation. There should be a template provided. And if your first name starts with A through C, you're going to focus on Articles 2 and 3. And everything's in Roman numerals, so you can find it that way. If your name is D through G, etc., H through J, first initial of your first name, find your article, pause the tape, and come up with those 4 answers before you move on to the next set of challenges. All right, welcome back. So as I mentioned, those articles are tough to understand, okay? So it's normal or expected if you were reading some of them and you were like, I have no idea what this is about, but you did your best, I'm hoping. So this is copied and pasted from the Colorado State government's website. So this is just something that I linked to, but I thought it would help you to see, like, depending on what article you focused on, this is like the simplified language of those articles. So I'll go through each one, but try to identify the ones that you focused on and see if you kind of got it right. So Article 1 combined the 13 states under one title of the United States of America. Article 2 basically said that anything not referenced in the Articles of Confederation was the power and the authority of the states. So that gave the states all the power that was not identified in the Constitution or the Articles. The third is that the combined states were responsible for helping each other if there was an attack. So we just sort of expect these friends, this league of friends, to just kind of help each other out if necessary. Article 4 has to do with who's allowed to travel from state to state, and if there is a person who is convicted of a crime, kind of how that affects their legal standing. So Article 5 created Congress, which is the legislative body, and what they agreed was that each state got 1 vote. No matter what, each state got 1 vote, and they could send up to 7 people to Congress, but they only got to vote once. So you could have a bunch of people there, but your state only gets 1 vote either way. Now, Article 6 is the central government is responsible for working with other countries, including trade agreements and declaring war. But so Congress can declare war, but states are the ones who need to have a standing militia. They need to have soldiers ready to go if America is ever attacked. Article 7 is that states could choose their own military leaders. And Article 8 is that each state needs to give some money to the central government. Now, how that's enforceable, remember, how do you enforce these things? Up to you. Article 9. Now, if you were assigned Article 9, it's a very long article. It's difficult to understand, but basically it says only the new central government could make and declare war or make and declare peace. So no one state could declare that on the part of all 13 states, that the central government had to do that. Article 10 created kind of a backup committee for the Congress. And Article 11, Canada can join. If Canada's interested, they're welcome to join. Article 12 is that the new nation is going to pay for their war debts from the Revolutionary War. And finally, Article 3 stated that this agreement was forever and eternal. And basically, it needed to be overturned by the Confederation itself if it was ever going to change. So think back on your questions. Based on what you interpreted, do you stand by your interpretations when you see that simplified list? Most of these articles are going to govern federal power or state power. You're not going to see a lot of individual authority or power represented here. How is the article enforceable, and what's one good or bad thing? So if you need to go back, pause the recording, update your, update or change your list of these 4 questions that you looked at, and then let's move on. So now, making a prediction. Based on what you read and listened and heard today, how confident, if you were one of those delegates, remember you're one of those 13 voting members proposing new laws, you're sitting in the room, how confident would you be if you were living in America at this time? Would you have thought, you know what, this government's going to be really successful? Or would you have had some reservations? Why would you feel that way? So would you have thought this government would be successful? Why or why not? Now, when we reconvene next time, we're going to talk about the road to Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which is another fascinating chapter in American history and really comes on the back of the American Articles of Confederation. All right, everybody, thank you for your time today, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say.